Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and I'm very proud today to announce a guest I've been trying to get on for a very long time. It's Alex of CanuckLaw. How are you doing, Alex?
Thank you for the invite.
No. Thank you for volunteering your time. Alex, I'm going to share your website, and I'll kind of like present it and go through it. In the meantime, can you tell the audience a little about yourself, as much as you feel comfortable telling
Fair.
them?
Um, I actually lived in Ontario for a long time. Wasn't political, didn't really read any of this stuff. And I came out to BC a while ago, and then oh, there's a crazy world out there that I didn't really know about. So the website, and I had some help with it, is just a culmination of just endless research and I don't know. It started off as a hobby, but it just became very time consuming. Um, Not a lawyer, not anything like that. It's just independent work.
It's a lot of work.
Thank
I
you.
tried reading the banking. I think I went to the banking cartel. So if you go to the website, you have it's all of these tabs up here, and every tab has a sub tab. So I went. I had a goal in mind. I'm like, I am going to read everything on this website. Then I'll
Good
reach out.
good good luck.
There's so much. I only got maybe 10% through this one sub tab for banking. I can't remember where I got to. Like, I don't think I did Mark Carney. Maybe common globalist takeover. The silver lining is that there is some overlap, so there's some repetition, but
Yeah,
it's still not enough. Like it takes a lifetime to go through all this stuff, huh?
it is. There's yeah. You're not getting any real stuff off the news, so it's just dig and find on your own.
And oh, I'll subscribe later. um, I wish I had come prepared. Do you have one? Where's the one for gun rights?
Under guns.
Where's there we go. So let's see if I can find what I'm talking about. What you do on the website is like you take out specific sections from legislation
Yes,
and you go through it line by line, right?
or at least the important parts. Yes.
And my point is it's not for the faint hearted. This isn't for like the TikTok crowd.
Oh God,
It's
no.
it's for people that want to like make a commitment to saving their country,
Yes.
and you walk them through this.
Admittedly, it gets rather tedious sometimes, but yeah.
It's a lot of work, but
I
it's nobody said it would be easy. So we agreed that we came up with some items that we wanted to go over, and the first one that you wanted to talk about was PHAC. Um, can you just assume the audience has never even heard that acronym. What is PHAC?
PHAC is short for the Public Health Agency of Canada. It's I'm not even sure what you call it. It's the organization that Theresa Tam runs. Now, there was a lot of, outrage back in 2020. The Tam also had a seat on a committee for the WHO. This seems like an obvious conflict of interest. Thing is, though, once you realize PHAC is actually part of the WHO, things start to make a lot more sense. Should I just roughly go through it?
Sure. Could you also tell us for the audience, the World Health Organization, like what is it?
Um, it's a branch of the UN. It came in the 1940s. I mean, it has sort of had predecessor versions, but the World Health Organization in the 1940s, um, essentially trying to come up with, I guess, what they call global standards for dealing with public health. It WHO has its own constitution, meaning that if you want to be a member, you have to sign on to their constitution. Their rules get, I think there's a 2/3 vote. If they're ratified, you have to obey them. It's essentially signing away a large part of your sovereignty. Um, PHAC itself is created by an order in council back in 2004. This is a response to so-called SARS. Um, World Health Organization had what you would call like a general assembly. Then everyone decided, okay, we're going to come up with our own little, I guess you could call them outposts of who in each country. Then out of nowhere comes PHAC, just created by an order in council. The PHAC Act, I think, was brought in 2006 to bring legislation in to give it legitimacy. And yeah, it's effectively a branch of the World Health Organization that nobody voted for and that we're stuck with.
2004, 2006. Was that Chrétien or Harper?
2004 was actually, I believe, Paul Martin just came in at that point. Harper didn't come in until I think January 2006. It was Harper that brought in the PHAC Act. And in late 2004, we brought, I think it was Bill C-12, the Quarantine Act, which I'm sure everyone's heard of. That, in essence, is a domestic version of the World Health Organization's international health regulations. So our Liberal government at the time brought in what they called an independent bill, but no, really, it's effectively written by the WHO for certain changes they wanted to make. And, no opposition, so everyone supports it. Suddenly we have the Quarantine Act, and then from there, the provinces in 2007 through 2010, they implement their own versions of the Public Health Act, which are what was the basis for various lockdowns in 2020, 2021. My point in all this being that none of this actually came from Canada. It was international dictates that were implemented by local politicians.
Okay, I see you're a very smart person, so you're going to get really irritated because I'm going to ask you to back things up a bit. Where does a bill come from? It's not the party that writes the bill. It's not the candidate. Is it like law firms, NGOs?
Well, nobody will admit that it's NGOs. Nobody wants to admit it. Well, Bill C-12, if I remember correctly, Ujjal Dosanjh, a BC MP, was health minister at the time. It came from him officially. Who actually wrote the bill? I don't know. Who actually drafted it? That I don't know.
Okay, how about this for a question? Whether it's a provincial bill or a federal bill, is it ever the government, like the executive branch, that's writing these bills and then handing it to the legislature?
Again, nobody wants to admit these things, but I imagine it's probably mostly written for them. They just present it.
Yeah,
probably
like what I'm
staffers or lobbyists, probably.
Staffers is what I mean, like the permanent bureaucracy. Because if you look at Bill 36, the Health Professions Occupations Act, apparently that thing was very, very large. This is not something that Payman Ascari would write, for example.
No, the best bills are ones that are short, to the point, and leave nothing to be, open to interpretation.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, I've meant to do a deep dive on Bill 36. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, good luck with that. That's another soul-crushing, thankless job. Yeah. So we were backing up from the you said the Quarantine Act, and you're saying
Yes.
that this probably came. You can't prove it, but it probably came from outside of Canada.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I know they were doing the hearings back in November 2004, they'd mentioned that it was during their parliamentary hearings, they'd mentioned that it was an influence in there, but no, they don't specifically say the who wrote this. Just that this, it was taken into consideration.
And is there no procedure around this? Whenever I'm writing an article, so if I write a PDF article and I get one person to contribute, I ask that one person, I'm like, would you like your name to be on here? And if they say no, I write anonymous. They don't do this with bills in Parliament?
Not really, no.
Jeez.
The best way I've found, and this is kind of a roundabout way, if you can do essentially a background check on your MP, find out who some of their staffers are, find out who's been lobbying them, you can kind of piece together who they've been talking to and who the contributors likely are. But no, you're not going to say person X wrote this passage, person Y wrote this, person Z contributed, this. You'll never see that.
What about the World Health Organization? Would it be accurate to say that it's the Global College of Physicians?
Um, you could interpret it that way, yes. A lot of public health, so-called public health advice that filters down nationally, provincially, originates from there. Like I'm not sure how regularly they still do it, but they had the WHO interim reports that were coming out every 3 months. Essentially, those were a series of talking points and agendas, things that premiers, prime ministers, presidents, chancellors, etc., were supposed to be implementing. It had to do with things like travel, vaccine uptakes, like percentage of people we wanted vaxxed, trade restrictions, mask orders, that kind of thing. So to a large degree, yes, the guidelines came down from the WHO. So you could call it a college of physicians. Sure, that would be fairly accurate.
You know why I say that is I know it's probably easier to say it's the Global Health Authority, but when I look at UNICEF, to me that's the global school board. So I look at the school boards locally or provincially as the franchises, and you have global center in the UN.
That's a fair comparison.
Um, what was the? I had another question. I'm getting forgetful in my old age.
No worries. Yeah, I think the big takeaway from all this is understanding that your premier, your prime minister, they're not the ones making the decisions. They're just the public faces of whatever's being implemented. I'd be very surprised if they write really anything.
So that was my question. The public face of who is in charge is I call this slavery. Like we're heading towards slavery. Every day it's another tyrannical bill, more
Right.
taxes. Do you think there's like a smoke filled room with a overhanging spotlight and these people are making decisions, these billionaire bankers, or is it just a runaway train that the state's gotten out of control?
Well, I'd say probably a combination of both. Like we're both in BC. I've met my own MLA several times. Nice enough person, kind of useless but nice enough. Um, a few people know this, but back in 2020, there's an agreement with all parties. Essentially, they would let Bonnie Henry run the province. They wouldn't make lockdowns a political issue. So, I kind of wondered, okay, so why are you here then? Like, if your job isn't being so-called opposition, why are you here? Like, what purpose do you function? Um, and as for being a runaway, well, he'd also mentioned to me that back in 2021, when the whole vaccine passports came out, yeah, all the premiers met in Ottawa, and it was more or less just implemented on consent by agreement. So nobody's thinking this through, or at least it doesn't seem like they're thinking it through. Well, the experts say we should do this, so I guess we should do it.
Where I was going with that, with the runaway train, everybody knows the expression the Nazis used. That was just following orders. But at least with the Nazis, like you followed the order of the person above you. Here, it seems like it's circular. Like the candidate reports to the party reports to corporations, corporations report to the UN. Nobody knows who the hell the UN reports to, back to the federal governments.
Yeah. Well, and I know, and one of the things for say, like, when the vaccines were implemented, okay, so who's really doing this? You can look up your respective lobbying registries as, oh, GlaxoSmithKline lobbies everyone, Pfizer lobbies everyone, AstraZeneca lobbies everyone. So you start to think, it's like, oh, what's your MP, your MLA? Nope, they're just doing what their handlers want. And if you really want a creepy example, the Conservative Party of Canada replaced their national secretary a while back. She was actually a drug lobbyist in 2021 for
Did
emergent. Yeah.
did they
Um,
replace her because she was a drug lobbyist?
no, I think she just moved on. But she was working for Emergent Biosolutions, which is the company that actually manufactures AstraZeneca. And she was sitting as essentially the behind the scenes chair of the CBC. Her name's Amber Ruddy. So you look
I,
her up, all kinds of drug lobbying. I mean, other things too. But like, guys, this isn't a good look having her on your board. Sorry, but it's not.
it literally sounds like I'm talking directly to your website.
Thank you.
You have all
Um,
the I see why the website's so hard to read. You're a smart person.
yeah, Aaron O'Toole, before he got into politics, he was a lobbyist for, among other companies, Facebook. Oh, gee, you have to wonder why he doesn't object too much to censorship. Well, consider who his client was.
Um, how does lobbying work? I asked this question of Randy Hillier. Like, do you think the party leader or the party whip says to the candidates, like, listen, we can't pass, we have to approve the censorship bill because if we don't, we won't get millions of dollars? Like, is it that transparent?
Um, well, unless you're actually in the meetings, there's no way to say for sure, but I imagine it's something fairly similar. Like, say okay, let's go. I don't know, oil development. It's like, well, you want these drilling projects approved. Well, you're up for re-election soon, and I really want you to do well. I want you to succeed, but we have some concerns. But yeah, without the actual notes or a video of the meetings, you won't know for sure. Unfortunately, they don't publish those.
Okay, so let's go back to PHAC. So what was the? I think it's the Public Health Agency of Canada.
Yes.
Like, what was the significance of that during the pandemic?
Well, they were more or less running the show. I mean, yes, there were the provinces, but it was essentially. Sorry, my animals are acting up. Essentially acting as a mouthpiece for the WHO, but at a national level. So whenever WHO comes down with this is what we should be doing, well, you don't hear it from the WHO, you hear it from Theresa Tam or whoever that person is. So
this goes back to, it's okay. You can't hear them that loud, but the question I asked you before, I said, like, I'm trying to figure out the intent of these actors, which is the hardest thing. From the World Health Organization, like, what are they? Are they just addicted to power? Is this somehow to get money to them?
well, I imagine prestige is a lot of it. To have your name, your profile on such like a well-known organization. Because I mean, someone like say Antonio Gutierrez is probably one of the most well-known people in the world. So ego, I'm guessing, at least in part. I don't know
Like,
how much they're paid.
this is a massive undertaking, though. It's like a criminal conspiracy. Let's get one PR person in every single country and then manage it top down in a tyrannical fashion. Like,
Well, the Quarantine Act was, I think, 2005 that the bill came in. 2004. So you have to figure there was at least 15 years of worth of planning for this to go in.
how far back do you think this goes? Like, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, did he know that? Is this the kind of world that he wanted when he made the changes in the country?
Um, well, if you want to go back even further than that, it wasn't called Health Canada then. It was called the Department of Health. This was in 1919, I think. Largely, it was after so-called Spanish. Was it Spanish flu? Yeah, we're gonna have a bureaucracy and implement public control measures. This is over 100 years ago, and then since it's rebranded itself several times, but it's more or less the same thing. So no, it goes back further.
When do you think Canada went wrong? Like, I trace it. The furthest back I can trace it is 1917 with the War Income Tax Act and 16 with the Corporate Tax Act. What do you think we went wrong?
Um, I'm kind of quasi on the bandwagon. Did Confederation actually happen? I'm one of those. Um, I don't think there's any one point that you can like identify this is the specific one. It's just a lot of things implemented over the years. Income Tax Act obviously is a big one. Oh, don't worry, it's just temporary to finance a war. It'll go away right after we're done. Never happened. Yeah, I can't pinpoint it.
Why do you say you're not fully on board with the 1867 Confederation?
It's just a conspiracy theory that Confederation never actually happened. I'm like, wait a minute, did it actually happen? I know the history books write about it, but where's the treaty?
Well, wait, walk us through this because I've heard the other one where the letters patent expired and we don't really have a governor general, but I haven't heard this one.
Yeah. And it's not something I've dived too deep into. It's just a theory that Confederation never happened, that the treaty as we know it didn't really happen. I know it's just I'd have to look more into it.
All right, I look
But
forward to
but I
seeing that
thank you.
tab on
But
your website.
I wouldn't be surprised though at this point.
Uh, yeah, I guess I am still blown away about what you said about how the parties at the provincial level got together and they said they wouldn't play politics during the pandemic.
Yeah, because at the time it was a NDP minority. There were I think 2 or 3 seats short of a majority. The Greens had 3, so essentially there was an NDP Green coalition. And then in I think it was October 2020, there's an election. Horgan calculated he can get a majority by calling it early, and he was actually right. But no, that was their agreement. No, we're going to keep the peace. We're going to not make politics of any of this. We'll let Bonnie Henry do her thing. Well, thing
And
is,
do you think?
I didn't vote for Bonnie. Neither did you.
Yeah, but again, I'm trying to get the intent. Like, do you see this as Bonnie Henry ruling with an iron fist, or do you see this as the premiers are just like, yeah, we'll let her, take the blame?
Oh, so it's a more cynical take. And that definitely is possible. I don't know for sure. Um, dump it all on Bonnie when things go wrong. Sure, that's actually a pretty good take.
Isn't that what happened in Alberta with Hinshaw or whatever?
Oh right, they fired her, and then I think she went to come work for BC.
We get Alberta's sloppy seconds. Yeah.
Yes. Um, but then again, Bonnie's kind of reading from the same script, so it's kind of hard to trace. It's like, yeah, she could just be taking the blame for Horgan at the time, but at the same time, she's taking orders from the WHO. So it's like, I don't know. That's a hard one to figure out.
I'm noticing an escalation as things deteriorate in Canada. Like our economy is imploding, faith in institutions is eroding. There's also an escalation from every person in public service to try to further destroy Canada. Like look at these tyrannical bills. And
Yeah.
and the reason I'm asking you, instead of asking you questions about data, facts, events, I'm asking you
Right.
about intent. Like, what the hell are these legislators thinking?
Like provincially, federally, or just in general.
In general, like the candidate in my writing is liberal. If this was me and I was a liberal candidate and I'm seeing what's happening, I'd be like, I'm just going to resign. Like I have too much integrity.
Um, well, the prospect of getting a pension after 6 years is very appealing. Let's be honest, it's very appealing. Um, I know she retired now, but I've met my former MP several times. She's nice enough, but it's like you can just tell she's in it for a paycheck. She's not what you call someone who rocks the boat. Um, I don't know. I would think at some point it becomes, well, it's just a job, it's a paycheck, gets me some very nice benefits. Because I can't imagine any internal joy in what you're doing. So it's got to be, hey, it's a good job.
Yeah, it's just weird for me. Like if if I'm working at a gas station and I get a lot of money, fine. But if I'm doing like international human trafficking, or if I'm a bouncer at a brothel and every day I got to go in there like brutalize these women, like that's that. It just I don't know how you reconcile those two, because these people, these MLAs, MPs, they have roots in the community. They have moms and dads that love them. They have to go home and look their kids in the eye and pretend like they're decent human beings, and I don't know how they do that.
I don't know. Hi, mom and dad. I just killed off your business. Love you. See you for Christmas.
Yeah. Say goodbye to your freedom of speech, dad.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it. Maybe cognitive dissonance. Maybe they just tell themselves, it's not really that bad. Or the other one is, well, you know what? We're part of the system. We'll be protected.
You know what
We'll
I
be safe.
say? What I tell
What?
myself, and I have to believe this because I can't believe there's evil people in the world. I think they're just stupid.
How does that expression go? Never attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity. Something like
Yep,
that.
yep, yeah. I use that all the time too, especially when I get a lot of conspiracy theorists that come to me and they're like, "Oh, this guy was standing on this corner, and this guy messaged you." I'm like, "No, no, trust me. People are way dumber than you think.
Oh God, I really need to rethink my perspective then.
People are pretty stupid." Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I can go with that.
Um. All right. So I don't know anything else about p hack. That was the first topic we were going to cover.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's not Canadian in any real sense of the word. It's an outpost of the WHO. Um, it doesn't represent you at all.
Here's a question, and I ask people: let's just say we had a magic wand and we made the United Nations disappear tomorrow. Would everything return to normal, or do we have a lot of homegrown psychopaths here?
Um, I guess if you're thinking like say an isolationist perspective, I don't think getting rid of the UN would be enough. You'd also have to get rid of like things like the Bank for International Settlements and all that, which I'm on board with. Um, I don't know that. I mean, evil people are just drawn to power, so it could just come back in some new form. How's that expression go? Nature abhors a vacuum.
That is true, and you're full of these expressions, aren't you?
Yes. So I don't know. They might come back in some other form. Start their own health organization.
Yeah, the Canadian Health Organization. Um, this is one thing I always struggle with, and I bring it up when I'm talking to people when we're criticizing the UN. It's important to figure out how much of this is purely top down, like these lizard people out in Davos or whatever, and how much of it is homegrown out of these universities where we have these, brainwashed students that then go into the workforce.
Well, I guess you can't answer that without looking at who funds the universities and things like, say, public health and your medical programs. A lot of that is pharma companies. Like you go on to say any university, you check out their major donors, you'll see some very familiar drug companies there. So all of your medical and nursing programs, they're very pro pharma. Well, you have to wonder why.
That's another question I've asked, and these questions I'm asking you probably won't be
Yeah.
able to answer. But pharma, big pharma, these 5, 10 corporations that sell pharmaceutical drugs, are they companies that somewhere along the way they lost their moral compass, or are they a front, like a shell company for these international bankers, and they're just using that to influence policy?
Um. Wow. That I don't know for sure. I mean, well, there's a lot of money to be made in drugs, so they could just be acting on their own.
Where I'm going with that is might have even been Catherine Austin Fitz who said this. State Street, BlackRock, Vanguard. People are suspecting that they're not even private. They're not a company. It's just a front holding a shell company for the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, I don't know the layout too much for that. Yeah, I know who they are, but haven't done a dive into their assets.
They just, just the biggest
Yeah.
hold company on the planet. Yeah. Yeah, Wolf. We know that these BlackRock and Vanguard, they own each other. It's really strange, and in a world where there's absolutely no privacy, everybody knows everything. I find it hard to believe that we don't know who owns Vanguard and BlackRock.
Well, I guess if you like, you could if you have companies owned by other companies or trusts owning companies, you can. There's things called layering. You can essentially put, as it implies, you kind of put layers of protection and and obstruction between the public and who you really are. So, I mean, it's possible to do that. So you don't really know, so you don't
I,
really know who owns it.
what I meant is like the government knows every single time I go to the bathroom based on like my movements with my cell phone. They know everything about me. Are you telling me they don't know who owns these two companies? Alex, you still there? Was that just a horrible joke? You dropped off? Hitler's personal secretary, Martin Bormann. Well, I guess while we're waiting for Alex, was a master setter-upper of shell companies and holding schemes. It's probably where Switzerland came from. Alex, Alex, are you back? Um. Oh, we lost Alex. Oh, she'll come back. Let's go over some of the comments. 338 MPs are terrorists. Oh, she's back. Somewhat.
Connection there for a moment.
Hey, Alex, welcome back.
Yeah. Sorry, where were we?
I don't know. You made me worried. I made a joke and then you dropped off, so it probably must have been a really bad joke.
Must a blip in the connection.
I think we were talking about BlackRock and Vanguard, and they took us
Yeah.
out.
Oh,
Uh,
of course.
yeah, just going after the most powerful company on the planet. I guess we can move on to another thing that you wanted to talk about. I can put this up. Is this whole concept of lawfare? Actually, I don't know if it's called lawfare. It's these lawsuits that people have brought on, and you call them scam lawsuits.
I do, yes.
So I'm going to let you speak to this, and I'll just go through this while you're talking.
Okay. Well, since 2020, one of the various lockdown measures and
Hey,
I sorry, I really hope it's not the internet. I,
I don't think it's you. It's either, it's not even me. I think it's the servers. But anyway, yeah, the scam lawsuits.
yeah. Basically, a lot of the big ones, not just they lose, but they just crash out big time, and then you have to start wondering, okay, why is that the case? And then people naturally think, oh, Trudeau bought off the judges. He threatened the judges. I hear that all the time. But you look into some of their pleadings, some of their cases, and I came up with an alternate theory. It's not the judge throwing the cases. It's I'd have to say it's the lawyers either through because they're idiots, or I don't know, maybe on the take. Their cases themselves are garbage. Um, and well, an obvious one is various union cases like people say challenging vaccine passports have unionized employers. Okay, well, if you're part of a union, typically you can't sue. You have to go through a grievance process. Usually that ends in arbitration. But in all provinces, we're seeing lawyers who file lawsuits anyway. Um, the government or the employer just brings a motion to dismiss, and the cases are thrown out. Hey, sorry, no jurisdiction. Okay, so why are lawyers filing lawsuits? You know, if you have to go through arbitration, and that happens was happening everywhere.
Let me jump in and contrast that with what we talked before. What we talked before was a potential top-down, insidious, global, centralized takeover. This is
Yeah,
probably just a bunch of knucklehead lawyers out to make a buck.
yeah, it could be. But still, like if yeah, something like this, if you have no jurisdiction to sue that you have to do arbitration, you need to be honest with your clients. This is never going to go anywhere.
Why would a lawyer do this? I mean, wouldn't they risk punishment from the law society?
Um, as you say, stupidity is an explanation, or greed. Because if your case is thrown out, well, sorry guys, you paid your retainer, no refunds. Of
Yeah,
course,
because we
sorry. The more cynical theory being that this was planned out, but of course, nobody's going to admit to that.
there could be another explanation. They figured, let's take any one of these organizations. They figured it's better to take people's money, take this into court, and then when it falls flat on its face, turn around and blame Trudeau for it. Maybe that's how they rationalize it.
Well, that's how a lot of people rationalize it, And I used to hear this all the time. Trudeau or Doug Ford or whoever, they bought the judge. Um, and I'm just looking at the list there. Can I just mention Adam Skelly briefly?
Sure.
It's a name that I'm sure everybody heard of back in 2020, 2021. He lived in Etobicoke and wanted to keep his barbecue restaurant open, do in person serving. Doug Ford essentially sent, his stormtroopers in to shut it down by force. Skelly got arrested and all that. So anyhow, in December 2020, when he was still in jail, um, the the province of Ontario brought an application essentially to have his business shut down. It was granted, but the judge put in a provision. You can do what's called a comeback motion. You can essentially, once you get the time, hire a lawyer, challenge these provisions. So he hires a lawyer. Now you would think the lawyer would challenge, shutting down his business, challenge, the state of emergency and all that. No, his lawyer brings a motion for damages. Doesn't actually challenge the underlying order. He brings a motion for damages. And the judge says, well, that's something separate. You'd have to start a separate proceeding. I can't handle this. So the motion was tossed for lack of jurisdiction. And this was Jasmine Akbarali, who's friends with Catherine McKenna, and everyone was just railing. The judge is corrupt. The judge is corrupt. Okay, but who's the idiot lawyer who doesn't know, you know, what to put in a motion? So it's thinking maybe it's the filing itself that was a problem. And incidentally, the lawyer never did file the correct paperwork, so that never went ahead.
These are things that you should like. It would be like putting diesel in a gasoline engine car. Like these are simple things they should know.
Yes. Well, if you're going to challenge an existing order by way of motion, it stands to reason that you would ask for remedies that would challenge the original order, right? You wouldn't just put a motion in for something completely different, because it wouldn't make sense to. So by essentially ignoring the original order and just say we're asking for damages, Skelly's lawyer put the judge in an awkward spot where she actually couldn't do anything. And I hate to say it, but the judge was actually right.
Because he filed the wrong motion or whatever.
For the wrong remedies, yes.
And this Adam Skelly guy, did he end up getting screwed over?
Oh, he got screwed over. He ended up suing his lawyer for malpractice over it. I'm not sure how far along that's gotten, but it's kind of funny.
Well, I'm kind of curious. Like, what's the purpose of a law society if they're not, you know, this seems like a clear-cut case where the law society would step in, apologize, and give damages. Pay out Adam Skelly.
Well, there's something, at least in Ontario, called the Victims' Compensation Fund, and it's, as the name implies, it compensates clients who've been, for lack of a better term, screwed over. It involves taking money out of the law society, and the law society is funded by its own members. So there's a bit of a conflict of interest here. That if we hold too many lawyers accountable, it becomes unprofitable. Well, I mean, when your salaries as a regulator are funded by your members, it's a conflict of interest. Because
Yeah, I've heard that.
your bills are being paid by the very people that you're paid to police.
This is kind of a common problem with all self-policing.
Yes. Like colleges of physicians and surgeons, they run essentially the same way.
I was going to say, what's the one for the judges in Canada? The Council of Judges?
I think so, yeah. I forget the technical name, but yeah, they've got their own little organization.
That's a great idea. Like, if I had ran my own podcast and I could police myself if I was saying racist or sexist things, yeah, that'll go great. I'll
Okay.
never slap myself with a fine.
There you go. Or just hire your buddy to regulate you. He'll make sure you're never hit with a fine.
Are you looking for a job, Alex?
Okay, don't worry, I'll be totally impartial.
We'll get the government of Canada to pay for
Yeah,
your salary. We'll use that $240 billion charity fund.
nice. Um, just looking at the list here. The next one down, item D, the CCSSEM. That was a petition you probably heard of against vaccine mandates for healthcare workers. Sounds like a great thing, except when you read the actual filings. Because an application for judicial review, you're essentially challenging an existing order. Was it reasonable? Which, okay, fair enough. But you look at the filings, they don't challenge the state of emergency. They don't challenge the so-called science. They don't challenge any aspect of the Public Health Act. So, what are you doing? So, the court, I think back in May of this year, said, oh, Bonnie Henry was actually reasonable in keeping the vaccine passport in place. Well, if you're not challenging anything, like the underlying facts of anything, then yeah, it is quite reasonable. So,
For that one argument I've heard, I'm going to push back on you, just devil's
okay,
advocate. These lawyers, they go in and they tell their clients, yes, what you're saying makes sense, in this case challenging the science, but trust me, the judge is not going to listen to it, so let's not even bother.
fair enough. But I mean, the whole point of the judicial review is the order that you're challenging, was that reasonable? And also in this case, they did the wrong standard. You can argue reasonable or you can argue correctness. They argued reasonableness. It's like, okay, many things can sound reasonable, but still be completely incorrect. But again, you're not challenging the Public Health Act or the science or anything. So yeah, in context, Bonnie's decision to keep the Vax Pass was reasonable.
So basically, by bringing this like turd of a case, they did more harm than good.
Well, there's that too. Now that there's a precedent that, hey, Bonnie's decision was reasonable, any subsequent challenges become significantly harder.
Well, yeah, what a jerk.
Yeah.
What do we got next?
Um, I know they dropped it. And this is actually how we first spoke. The whole vaccine choice case was dropped, I believe, back in May or June of this year. Vaccine Choice Canada. They brought theirs back in July 2020. Sounds great, made all kinds of news. And then it just sat for 4 years. And it's like, and you wonder why there's never any updates posted. It's because there are no updates. There's nothing to post.
Again, this I told you earlier, like I
Yeah.
have to believe that people are good because it's hard
Yeah.
for me to live in a world with evil. I think I could contribute this to laziness. Like, yeah, you wake up on January and it's like, oh, this is the greatest idea, and you get raise all this funds, and then it's March, and you're like, actually, I changed my mind. I just want to go play video games. Maybe they just
Yeah.
got lazy.
Um, but when you're raising for all this money under the pretense that this is an emergency, it's 2020, we have schools shut down, we have mask mandates going into place. Like, this is a pretty urgent thing to do. This will, well, we'll deal with it when the time comes. That doesn't really seem urgent to me. And now that the case is dropped, is anybody getting a refund? And
Yeah, these things are problematic. Yeah.
and the pleading itself, I think, is like 200 pages. It included all kinds of things that you can't bring up in a civil court. Like, you can't ask a judge to make criminal code declarations. You can't ask them to make declarations about international criminal court, the Nuremberg Code, crimes against humanity. Like, and if you're bringing allegations in about Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, okay, you probably have to sue them. You can't just name them, but not actually sue them. So it was just a dumpster fire that just sat for 4 years. And like, okay,
Uh,
so is anybody getting a refund?
Speaking of 200-page lawsuits, the Action for Canada one. This is the one by that Rocco guy.
Yeah,
Rocco.
yeah. Action for Canada. That one was actually 400 pages.
That's long as far as cases go.
Well, for your typical statement of claim, I mean, obviously things vary, but like, depending on how complex it is, you might be looking, say, realistically, like 30, 40, 50 pages. We don't file a book.
Was he getting paid hourly? What was going on?
I don't know the salary arrangements. It's funny, Action for Canada did just file an amended claim a few days ago. I mean, it's much shorter. It's about 50 pages. It's taken out a lot of the, Bill Gates stuff. It's taken out the Gavi stuff. But it's like, it's still asking for things that you can't, still, criminal code, Helsinki Declaration, Nuremberg. It's still in there. It's asking for declarations of what the scientific consensus is. You can't do that in a court.
This guy, this gentleman, what's his name? Rocco?
Yeah.
Whatever his name is. Oh crap! I don't know if we were supposed to say his name, but like he's a very successful attorney though. He was involved with the Bank of Canada, and he almost made like positive changes in the country.
Well, the Bank of Canada case, I mean, in principle, that was a good one. That also had a lot of things that you can't bring up in a civil court that was ultimately struck. The court basically said, we're not here to implement social policy. Comer is still active, but I don't think they have any more court stuff. The Bank of Canada case would have amounted to, and don't get me wrong, I agree with the changes, but it would have involved essentially amounted to implementing social changes, which isn't really the function of a court. Like, they're not supposed to be de facto legislatures.
If
So
I understand correctly, the argument was, I guess you're right. Like the bank, well, they were saying the Bank of Canada has a charter and it's not following that charter. Isn't that what they were saying?
that was part of it. Yeah, there's um, that has to do with also like giving out interest-free loans to the provinces. Which, okay, well, if you have lost some money, you can sue for damages, but changing the social policy itself, that's not really the goal of the courts. So, I mean, don't get me
So
wrong,
what?
I agree with a lot of Comer's goals. I just don't think the court is the right place to implement them.
What Build S275? That's a reaction to this case to return the Bank of Canada to giving interest-free loans.
Bill 2, oh, S275, which one is that? Sorry.
That's the one where they're trying to change the function of the Central Bank of Canada, basically make it impossible to re- repeal the changes Pierre Elliott Trudeau made.
Oh, so I was looking at, Sustainable and Equitable Prosperity to the Bank of Canada Act. Um, well, depending how generously you read that one. Um, let's see. Hold on, I'm just pulling up the bill now. Economic trends will be shaped by demographic shifts, the climate crisis, technological changes, and global political uncertainty. And then goes on to promote sustainable and equitable prosperity. Dude, that sounds like communism.
Yeah, anytime the word equity comes up, it's
Yeah.
communist.
Well, the private members' bills are actually in some cases more interesting. Well, first of all, nobody talks about them. And second, a lot of the content in those actually makes its way into bigger bills at some point. Yeah.
It's like
I don't
watching
know if
your.
it's going to head.
It was brought by Senator Stephen Harper, appointed senator, and I think just after she pieced out, she just dropped this bill. They love doing this. Like, you know how the presidents, they pardon just complete psychopaths right
Yeah.
before they're out on their way out, like Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
Senators do the same thing.
Drop some legislation and say, bye, guys, I'm retiring.
Yeah, she goes to like the Cayman Islands or something.
Oh, God. I didn't know about that. But
That's how I heard it. Yeah.
um,
Who was it introduced by?
um,
Sponsor is Senator Diane
Diane
Delmere.
Belmer.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't really know too much about her. Oh yeah, a lot of the private members' bills. Who writes them as well? I mean, I know Bill C-293 was in the news a while back. The whole International Pandemic Treaty, and that's basically just domestic implementation of the proposed global pandemic treaty. So then the obvious question: who wrote Bill C-293?
Let's talk about that because I had somebody on earlier, either today or yesterday, and it's the World Health Organization pandemic treaty, but just
Yes.
they failed globally, so they're passing it federally.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what you see as quote unquote non-binding international treaties will eventually make their way into the federal parliament as either government bills or private members' bills. So the content will essentially be passed domestically. So then, how are things non-binding if your politician is just going to implement it anyway?
That if you recall, I asked you how much of it is top down, how much of it is bottom
Yeah,
up. It's almost like the UN is a laundering operation. So you get the communists in your country, they launder it to the UN. They'd be like, "Oh man, the UN is telling us we have to do it. We have no choice. I guess
yeah.
no more meat for you guys. We should switch to eating bugs."
Well, for the World Health Organization specifically, there's provisions in their constitution. If you want to be a member state, you have to adopt their constitution. So, and there's provisions in there that essentially would force a country to adopt, like, their international health regulations anyway. So by simply signing a membership form, you're de facto signing away at least for that, a part of your sovereignty.
Um, I guess you are. What I'm saying is, to me, sovereignty is sovereignty of the individual. Like it kind of clumps together. You get the national sovereignty. You can make your
Yeah,
own laws, but like Trudeau is the one that's stealing my sovereignty. EB is the one that's stealing my sovereignty through all these property taxes and just wiping out my assets.
fair enough.
Uh, like it doesn't matter to me whether Trudeau is doing it federally or whether he's asking the UN to do it to me.
Yeah. Well, I guess I know, and I'm not justifying this in any case. At least hypothetically, you can vote to get rid of David Eby. You can vote to get rid of Trudeau or, the Liberal MP in your riding. In theory, you can vote that out. How do you vote out a UN delegate?
Well, let me answer that question with another question. How do these people get voted in? Does Canada have a say in them?
Well, the UN has various assemblies. It's about 200 countries, and usually it's a two-thirds majority are required to adopt certain resolutions. So then, okay, well, if you're one of the one third or so who doesn't support something, you can simply be outnumbered by, say, a majority in Africa and Asia.
Yeah,
So
I see where you're going with this.
yeah,
Yeah.
so you can have a majority of countries say, on the other side of the world, they want these changes because it's in their interest. Well, this is democracy, majority rules. Okay, but I don't live in the Middle East or Africa or Asia. I don't live anywhere there. So, I want the decisions that impact my life, as do you, to be made by people who live around you, who are connected to your same interests. But you can't have that when, democracy means the world at large.
Right. How about this characterization? Because for the longest time, the U.S. was using NATO to implement its global policies. Has U.S. power eroded to the point where now maybe communist China, African nations, Middle Eastern nations are using it to fight back?
Well, the problem with having using all the military power, well, first of all, it depletes your budget, causes resentment among your locals. Nobody wants to be drafted. So it's a huge strain on a country. And yeah, can the U.S. keep doing it? I don't know. Um, but having military bases all across, say, the Middle East, when you got 50 million people coming in your country illegally through Mexico, maybe it's not the best use of your military. I don't know. Maybe line them up from, say, California to Texas. Instead of having a million troops around Israel, have your million troops along your southern border with
I
orders to
was
actually stop people, of course.
I was going in. That's what I was referring to, the compact for migration. Um, I can't tell who's behind it. I can't tell if it's progressives like Joe Biden who think, I don't know, they have a different vision for America, or whether it's like the Saudis and the royal family in Saudi Arabia.
Well, the whole thing about like migration is it's a huge business for everyone involved. You've got many NGOs, and I'll come out right to say a lot of, and it's not just particular country. It's a lot of Jewish NGOs, a lot of Muslim NGOs, a lot of Christian NGOs, partially ideologically, partly because they're funded, who have interest in helping with so-called resettlement programs. We have a financial interest in bringing as many people to the West as possible. Um, Companies like it because, we're bringing, say, 100 million people to the West. Well, that's 100 million new potential customers. Think of the economic growth. Think of the job creation, or I guess you say, or you got business. Think about, we have 100 million people. We can pay them a lot less because there's more supply, less demand. So, and of course, your locals who say, we don't want anything to do with any of this. But it's big business though, bringing like the whole migration industry.
Uh,
So
You're also an author, right? You've written one or more books?
A few, yeah. They're mostly just compilations from the site.
Right. I don't remember the name of it, but I did read one of your books. And in that book, you specifically singled out a Christian organization in Canada that was supporting immigration. It was the Canadian Christian Federation or something.
Um, well, there were three that were actually challenging the safe third country agreement. They were Amnesty International, Canadian Coalition for Refugees, and the Christian Churches of Canada. I think it was.
That one,
No,
the Christian
yeah,
churches. And um, I get a lot of pushback because I've been criticizing the charitable donations. It's mostly from the provinces, but 240 billion, and a lot of these go to churches, mosques, temples, synagogues. And I'm telling them, like, the moment you give money to churches, federal government taxpayer money to churches, you open up the door, because then the mosques and the temples are going to be like, well, what about us? So now
yes.
it's just like this massive money. I wouldn't say laundering, but it's just like they're stealing and squandering taxpayer money.
Well, these organizations are also what's considered tax-exempt charities. So, depending on your operational budget, that's very significant impacts because you effectively don't pay any tax and you get deductions on virtually everything.
Somebody else told me that when you can do a tax deduction, or like if you give tax deductible receipts, like political parties, that's almost like the government is funding you, because uh, your contribution has been rolled back, and then somebody else has to contribute to make up for
Well,
it.
like take federal politics up to a certain amount. I think it's 75%, and then it scales down from there. If I make say a $300 donation to a party, any party, regardless of ideology, I can then file that with my taxes and get a $225 refund, which means my $300 contribution costs $75. So the public is paying the other $225.
That's what I was trying to get at, but
Yeah.
it's not the public, it's the government. It's your taxpayer money,
Yes.
because they're hoodwinking you, like this is a theft.
Yeah. So it really amounts to essentially subsidies for contributing to political parties. And
Yeah.
interestingly, it's higher subsidies than you get for, say, charitable contributions. Charities are generally around about 40 to 45%.
I think we need to drastically simplify our tax code. Um, this is just like it makes it opens the possibility for fraud, because
Yeah.
no one person has visibility on what's going on.
Well, I know they keep making changes to tax codes because they want to, and you can argue this is social engineering. They want to promote certain behaviors. Oh, we want people to buy homes so they can pay taxes. Well, we're going to give deductions for home ownership loans and mortgages. Make your mortgage payments interest free. That sort of thing. Or we want people to get healthy. We're going to make a certain part of your gym membership tax free. We'll give you that tax break. So every time there's a new change made, it's to encourage some kind of behavior.
Well, I think the most obvious example is sin taxes, like alcohol, tobacco.
Yeah, we can't prohibit it. We'll just tax it.
With tobacco, like I don't smoke cigarettes, I don't smoke weed, so I don't care either way. I live in a resort town in Whistler. You probably know where it is, and the people here, they're perpetually high off weed, and they never shut up about how cigarettes are bad for you. Cigarette smoke on the mountain, it's a
Right.
pollutant. I'm like, it's like, I don't know, 20,000 acre mountain. I'm pretty sure nobody's gonna mind if someone smokes a cigar.
Yeah, and there's plenty of harmful stuff in weed as well.
I'm sure there is. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not making people smarter.
Yeah, it's like, and do you really want to be arguing? Well, I inhale fewer poisons than you do. It's not quite a win here.
Yeah, it's not something to be bragging about. I'm less of a lazy person than you are.
Yeah. I There's an old expression in business called "you get what you reward," and the same principle applies to taxes. If you want some behavior, whatever it is, to be followed, you make it profitable. If you want to discourage it, you make it more expensive. And yes, that is, social engineering, but that's kind of how your tax system works.
We got started talking about the 1917 War Income Tax Act. I think that's where this all started. Um, we gave them an inch, and now they've taken a mile. Look at the carbon tax. I get into some arguments um, with people that support the carbon tax, and I try to convince. I'm like, this isn't the purpose of taxes. Like taxes are supposed to pay for the lights and the streets. They're not supposed to get payment of scurry to drive a different vehicle.
Yeah. Well, if you read something like say the Paris Accord, which is I think what 2015 that was signed, like it just goes. You can find a copy online. It goes on and on about scaling up financial flow. It's has essentially nothing to do with environment. It really is just a giant wealth transfer. And then you try to ask people, it's like, oh, so what are we doing? It's like, well, we're making the environment better. Okay, how? Well, we're discouraging this. Okay. And then we're sending money abroad. It's like, okay, how does that help? And I think it upsets a lot of people when you start asking, how does this actually accomplish anything?
I know why it upset to them. Their cause is noble. So if you point out a flaw in their plan, it's not that their cause is wrong. It's just that they need to fix the plan. So
Right.
I don't even waste my time with those people.
Like, like I agree, spraying certain chemicals on it, or, generating, harmful substances, dumping toxic waste. I agree. That's very harmful. I support banning all that stuff. But how does paying a tax to the UN actually do anything?
You're
And
asking tough
then,
questions, yeah.
and I've also asked somebody, and I've gotten, rather confused expressions from this. This whole cliche that Canada does I think it's 1.6% of global emissions. Where do you get that number from? Oh, well, the UN comes from the UN. Okay, where do they get it from? Well, it was figured out. Okay, figured out how? Can I see the spreadsheet? So you have we have these these claims. Oh, we have to do this and lower emissions by this. Okay, what are you basing it on? And this is outside the scope of today, but it's if you're just doing like assumptions and modeling. Okay, where are your assumptions coming from? Like, what is the basis for it?
Yeah, you're touching on a philosophical issue, like because everybody's lost trust in everything. I was thinking about this the other day. Like when you have an election and those results are announced, we just assume that they're telling us true numbers. But if they lied, like how the hell would we know?
Yeah. Or like the U.S. elections, a lot of time. Well, the polls closed 5 minutes ago. This state is predicting this outcome. This state is predicting that outcome. Okay, you couldn't have counted your votes in 5 minutes. You've already come to your conclusion. And as for modeling that whole thing, in 2020, the case counts. Well, all that's based on modeling in certain scenarios. Okay, you need data to function. Okay, I get that. But how do you come to these conclusions that we need to do this to crush 50% of the cases? Well, it's what the computer model says. Okay, can you provide the data that you used? Well, no, that's proprietary. So we shut down society based on computer modeling that nobody wants to take credit for or even show how they did it. That's not sketchy at all.
I don't think people understand, like when they say models, like it's literally a model, like a math equation or some spreadsheet. They just plug numbers in, and
Yes.
people are probably not ready to accept that because that's essentially they're lying.
Well, I've had this argument countless people over the years. Even if you're the most educated person on the planet, a model is just a prediction. You're not proving anything. You're just predicting. In a certain period of time, this will happen. Now, you may be validated after the fact that you're good at predicting, okay, but it's still not proof. And the comeback is, well, these are the experts, they have PhDs and years of research. Okay, but they're still just making predictions. And that's also very upsetting to people.
Like I said, people aren't ready. Alex, I had another question before we end the show. On the issue of climate change, have you heard of this thing called ecosystem services?
I've heard, I haven't looked too deeply into it.
They're really nefarious, and I'm keeping an eye on it. You take things that happen in nature, like bees pollinating, water being filtered through the soil, and they're trying to put a dollar value on it. And so what they're saying is, if we kick people off the land, and if we give this land to a company, and they let that happen, we have to take tax dollars and pay that company for allowing those ecosystem services to go on. Does that make sense?
Um, I sense a lot of opportunity for corruption because there'd really be no interest, like financial interest, in doing things well for the general public. It's okay. How can we tweak our results to make it more lucrative? Like I
Well,
just see.
I don't think they're doing it for good intentions. I'm guessing this is at the behest of those companies that will be managing the services.
Oh, as for the comment up there, debt for land swaps. That's another thing that a lot of your things like your carbon taxes are going towards. They're funneled through third parties like UNESCO. They're quote unquote foreign aid to other countries, but it's never for free. Typically, it's money's given away, like lent out, with the expectation you'll give it back, interest and conditions. Oh, sorry, you can't pay. Well, that's okay. We'll forgive your loan, but we want a piece of your land to be set aside as a heritage site. Or we want you to implement certain education policies. Or we want you to implement certain health policies. It's essentially global usury, which, by the way, our tax dollars are helping to finance without our consent.
That's another thing that pisses me off. That 240 billion I said, like we're
Yeah,
fighting a war where we're also punching ourselves in the face. That's our tax dollars are being used against us.
yes. And if you object to it, you're just cold and inhuman.
Yeah, because they call it charity. It's
Yeah.
like I mentioned, and they're giving it to the churches. And evil payment ascari doesn't like churchgoers.
Well, and well, as for giving away for say like churches and NGOs, okay, but the whole idea of say free enterprise is that you can spend your money however you want to, to best yourself and your family. Okay, that's fine. But when you're giving away huge amounts of your tax dollars to interests that directly conflict with what you want, what you believe in, it is it's theft.
Yeah, it shouldn't
And
even be called charity.
I mean, I guess politically, I guess politically, in many ways, I'd be considered an isolationist. Like, I want nothing to do with like global systems. So when I see, my taxes spent on things which to make a more integrated, connected world, I don't really want that. I subscribe to the philosophy, good fences make good neighbors. I wish everyone the best in their own societies. Off on your own. Like it's I have a very isolationist stance. But
I do too now. That I look at the U.S. like the amount of money, a lot of what they're doing. It's true they're going after markets, but all this military expenditure, like they need it to keep these markets open and the trade routes open. So the more they profit from trade, the more they have to invest to keep that trade open.
well, and as far as the whole military industrial complex goes, when you got enough, and or military towns and whatnot who depend on, significant financial investment in the military. Well, if you're not continuously spending on soldiers and new weapons and new equipment, well, the businesses will shut down. Your military towns will shut down. So it's something where to sustain many people's livelihood, you have to bleed yourself out for military budgets, and that's really sad.
You actually sound like you're describing the public sector in general, like all these government employees in Canada, like they're dependent on government.
Uh, I guess more broadly that could be extrapolated. Yes, um, we have all these departments. Do we really need, a lot of them? Well, maybe not, but there's a financial, well, the public sector is a huge voting bloc. Even provincially, you've got hospitals and schools. Um, I know BC teachers is huge sway in contributing to elections because they're huge donors. Same in places like Ontario. Teachers union are huge donors. So when politicians want to run for office, they have to, to a degree, kiss the ring. But of course, that's not what you vote for.
It's ugly. Politics is really ugly. Everybody, I don't. People don't understand how everybody is different. Like, everybody want a different thing, and it's really hard not to pander, I guess, to different people.
Yeah. Well, in order to get some sort of like working majority, especially with the system we have, in a sense, you have to be all things to all people, which of course you can't be. So you, pardon my French, you'll have to lie your ass off to people, promise things you have no intention of delivering on, just so you can cobble enough votes together to get a win. And quite predictably, that makes people very cynical when, you can't deliver on it. Well, you had to win somehow.
I think government's just gotten way too big. Like,
Yeah.
we need to scale it down so that people stop abusing it. It's just the amount
Yeah.
of money. There's so much money that's going into the coffers of government.
Term limits is a good place to start.
Term limits is one. What Ron Paul gave a good suggestion. He said any MP that's in any government that runs a budget deficit should be barred from office ever again. You'll start getting balanced budgets.
Yeah. And I gotta just play devil's advocate there. To avoid that, you'll come across people who will, quote unquote, cook the books a little to make sure they get balanced budgets. Hey,
That's
hey,
true.
hey, I hate to be a downer, but you're gonna get into that at least to a degree.
Yeah, like what they're doing with inflation. They're just like, oh, we're just going to recalculate inflation this way.
Oh, fuck that. This is off topic, but it's in terms of miss or like changing the definitions of things to make it misleading. You know what the Canada Pension Plan is, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Well, they use for calculating their investment portfolio. They use something called open book valuation. Essentially, that means they measure money going in, money coming out. As long as they're able to meet their, their commitments, they're good. They're good to go. The problem is that's kind of accounting fraud. Most businesses use something called closed book valuation. They look at total assets versus total liabilities. Any factor in the pension plan has so many liabilities it has to plan out that it doesn't really disclose. Yeah, it's in here. So the CPP is actually, I would argue, deliberately misleading when it's in its reports. It uses I would say, faulty calculation method in order to conceal just how in debt it is and how many liabilities it can never pay off.
You're talking about future liabilities. Like they're just
Yes.
pretending like that, the future doesn't exist. And
Yes, because I imagine I'm not sure your age, but I imagine you have quite a few years to go before you retire. Okay, but then once you hit that 65 or whatever, the money you put into CPP, that's yours. It comes back, as everyone around the same age block. But the open book valuation doesn't take that into account. They just look at, well, can we pay our bills right now? Okay, well, payments can be retiring in 20 years. What about his payments?
if I could dumb that down for the audience, the problem is that the population is not growing fast enough.
Well, even if it grows fast enough and even more people contribute, thing is, those extra people, they're putting in pension plan contributions that they have to get out when they retire.
Yeah, but we're talking about a Ponzi scheme here.
Yeah, essentially, yes. And you
But
can't grow a population indefinitely. It's not possible.
yeah, that's the catch. I mean, if you could grow it indefinitely and every year the population doubled or whatever, yeah, sure, it's a great idea for pension plan, but
Yeah, it doesn't work in reality. And I did a little quick math years ago. Assuming your average life expectancy and how many years you're expected to, you know, get your contributions, you're only getting about 30 or 40% of what you paid in. Like the average, like regular normal salary. Like you're assuming you live to say 75 or so, you're only getting a small percentage of what you actually paid in.
yeah, that argument, the reason it's a tough argument to make is because the company matches your contribution by 50%, or whatever, 1 to 1. So unless you wanted to give that money to the employee and say, go ahead and invest it yourself, I don't know. Most people just don't, they're not leaders, and they just don't like doing this independently.
Yeah. Of course, the way around all the system is just, and I know people say it's overreach, just make it mandatory for everyone to set up their own private pension plan, and then when they retire, they get whatever's in there.
You're talking about like a token credit
Yeah.
system.
Well,
No.
instead of having CPP run pensions for everyone, it's say you turn 18, you have to set up a pension plan account for your own, and then when you retire, whatever's in it belongs to you.
What happens if you don't set it up? Do they throw you in jail?
The details obviously are something to work out.
No, I say the same thing about healthcare. Like we don't have
Fair.
health. I see it as health insurance. It's a single payer health insurance model, and they're spending the money on your behalf. Like they could just as easily just give you health vouchers. You know, it's a, what do you call it? Wealth redistribution scheme.
Yeah.
You take money from the rich and you're giving it to the poor, but only for health.
Yes. Okay, well, here's a voucher. Here's $500 off your next hip replacement.
I guess. Well, no, not like that. Not directly.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding, of course.
Yeah. What they would say is, everybody, go invest in your health insurance provider of choice, and I don't know, if they don't and they break their hip, that's their problem.
Wow.
I guess on that note, it's a good time to end it. This has been a long episode.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invite.
So, Alex, thanks for coming on. And I was blown away by how much information you have, so much knowledge you have, so much wisdom you have. I encourage everyone to go check out your website.
Thank you.
CanuckLaw.ca, correct?
Yes.
Thanks for coming on. I hope everybody enjoyed the episode, and have a nice day.
All right. Thanks. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.